If you're subscribed to this channel or you just clicked on the title of this video, chances are global evangelism is something you're passionate for. And out of all of you, there's probably a small number of people that think about the possibility of moving abroad as being a short-term possibility. Within the next 12 months, you could very well see yourself living abroad, preaching abroad. But I think for the majority of you, that's not something that when you consider where you're at in your life is a possibility on the short term. Rather, this is a long-term goal. Perhaps this is something that you could see yourself doing in 5 years down the road. And so that's really the focus of this video is what are 5 things that I would recommend for those who are 5 years away from moving abroad to think about training, preparing for, and developing as you anticipate moving and preaching abroad as being part of your future. Hello, my name is Dan, and I've been living and preaching the gospel in the West African country of Sierra Leone for about 2 years now. And I just got back from a super short visit to the U.S. where I attended a week-long Bible study camp intended for young men from ages maybe 12 to the early 20s. And so I was invited to attend the camp as staff. And this is a really intensive Bible study camp. There may be 7, 8 Bible classes per day, including times devoted to singing and prayer and other very edifying activities. And it was in this camp that I just had numerous dozens of conversations with young men in their mostly teen years who feel convicted for the possibility of moving abroad to teach the gospel. And I was able to talk to a lot of them, and they had a lot of questions. So that's really what inspired this video. I want to share some recommendations and some information and some encouragement for those who are maybe 5 years away from moving abroad. So either you're a teenager and you just know you're not in the right phase of life for that to be a short-term possibility, or even you're an adult, but because of some things in your life, you just realize this is something that could be possible down the road, but not immediately. I want to share with you just 5 things that I think would be really helpful in the short term as you're preparing for that more long-term possibility. And so these are not going to be like the 5 most important things, but just some things that I would encourage you to think about, prepare for, really train yourself to be, that I think will pay dividends if and when the availability to move overseas occurs. So the first thing, and this is maybe the most generic point that I'll make in the video, is don't neglect to grow and train your character and your understanding of God's Word. Those are 2 things that will travel well regardless of what country you're living in. I think in my own experience, the best Christians make the best evangelists and missionaries. And so if you're able to develop Christ-like character, develop your own discipline, your own commitment to holiness and to righteous behavior and attitudes, if you're able to attain a knowledge of God's Word, then that's really going to benefit your work for the kingdom no matter what country you decide to move to down the road. And these are things that don't just change overnight. These are things that take a series of commitments over a period of months and years in order to see significant growth and change. And so just generally speaking, there are a lot of temptations and challenges that will be present in most overseas environments that you decide to move to. And just one example of that, if you were to move to most third world countries, it's very likely that your opinions and your example and your character will be looked at in a much more weighty and heavily influenceable way. And so that's something that can be used for good or used for bad if your character and your teaching and your understanding of God's Word is not up to the task. Godly, righteous character, having a humble heart, is something essential to nurture before moving overseas, and I would even encourage people to develop that years before they decide to do so. Similarly, when it comes to developing Bible knowledge, unfortunately, one of the challenges that I'm experiencing in Sierra Leone is a lot of what I'm teaching is the very ABCs of faith in the Bible, the very basics. And so I don't have as much time to devote to the weightier, deeper things. And so I'm so thankful that when I was in the U.S. before moving here, I was tutored and trained and encouraged by a lot of really wise, older, mature Christians that really encouraged me to dig deeply into the scriptures, not just the easy and simple parts. And that's really helped me in this season of my life, being able to pull upon a lot of that. And so that's something that you're going to have a unique opportunities to grow in that way where you're at now, where maybe that might be more of a challenge if in the future if you were to move to a place that didn't have a very strong Christian foundation. The second thing I'll encourage you to do is to discover, meet, and network with older, wiser men and women who are familiar and experienced in this type of work. All right, find people who have done or are doing the type of thing that you hope to do 5 years down the road. And so most of you maybe know someone in your church that has either lived abroad or made short-term preaching trips. Talk to them, meet with them, hear their stories. Almost everyone that I've talked to that has been engaged in this type of work is super eager to be able to share their experiences with you. And so take advantage of that. Even if that means traveling. You know, if you can talk to your preacher or your shepherds or whoever, ask them who are people that they would recommend that you contact and network in order to get more experiences of talking to people about their past and their history in overseas evangelism. Really soak up that knowledge. Have those people become your mentors and your trainers as they counsel you and give you advice regarding how to proceed in your own journey to preaching overseas. This is something that I did in my past and almost by accident, and I'm so thankful I did that I have this really rich resource of men and women that have done this before, so that when I'm in a pickle here and I'm experiencing things I don't understand or don't know what to do, I just know I have people in my corner that would be so glad to share their own personal past experiences and advice and thoughts regarding what I should do. And so find a support system like that that will also help you to kind of maintain this fire and motivation to make this an attainable goal that you'll follow through on in the future. Tip number 3 is going to be to learn a language. And so this is something that you can do now that could really benefit your work and your efforts in the future. And this is not just about learning a language and then choosing to move to a country that speaks that language. Maybe the language that you learn now is not the language that is spoken in a country that 5 years from now you have the opportunity to go to. However, just the process of learning a second language, that process is going to help you in learning a second or a third language if you were to move somewhere else. So I feel a little bit hypocritical because I was not bilingual before moving to Sierra Leone. I am now. However, I spent a lot of time in my past, and I have a lot of experience kind of dabbling with different languages. When I was maybe 8 or 9, my uncle taught us Greek, again, not fluently, but enough where I understood some of different language structures and things like that. My wife is half Mexican, and so we spoke a lot of Spanish in the house. We even do that now. One preacher that I was really close to lived in Brazil, and so for a period of time we would go over Portuguese together. And although I didn't learn any of those languages fluently, it was extremely helpful when I moved here to kind of already have an idea of how to learn and kind of what different languages are about and how to be flexible with some of those things. And so I would encourage anyone to learn a second language while in the U.S. Maybe that's the language of a country that you would move to, but either way, that's going to be a helpful experience that you can draw on when learning another language if you were to move to a country where that language is not spoken. All right, so this next one might be a little bit controversial, I don't know, but I would encourage people that have this as a long-term goal of theirs to include this goal and this mission that's very worthy. Be aware of that when making relationship decisions, and I'm talking about who you decide to marry. So I think for me, one goal that I had when I was first introduced to the idea of moving abroad, I was a single man, I was not married yet, and the way someone described it to me is try to find someone who is as passionate about lost souls and loves lost souls as much as I do. Because if I were to find someone that does not have that same value system, then my life choices would end up being very frustrating and very challenging to that person. And so I would encourage you all not to allow this godly, kingdom-centered goal of preaching Christ abroad. Don't just isolate that passion into a single aspect of your life, but allow that passion to influence the type of relationship decisions you make. Allow it to impact your career choices, your economic choices. I might talk about down the road how you can economically prepare for the mission field, but one way is not getting into a whole lot of debt. That's going to make it more challenging to move abroad, where maybe making money is going to be a harder thing to do. And so that's something that I would encourage everyone to prepare for and think about. If you're not married, well, try in your evaluation of people that you would consider marrying, considering if they would be willing to move with you abroad. Having those preliminary conversations with people that you're dating or you're seeing or you're courting in that way, I think is something that's very appropriate to do. And my last point, number 5, is going to be live one step continually outside your comfort zone. So this is pretty vague, pretty broad, but just kind of hear me out what I'm saying. Living abroad in a foreign culture, or most likely they're speaking a foreign language, in a foreign way of life, is really challenging, and it's uncomfortable because there's very few things that are familiar to you, very few things that you grew up doing that you still do. It's everything's different, everything's challenging, everything's new, everything's outside your comfort zone. However, if for the past 5 years you've constantly been living one foot outside of your comfort zone, then by the time you were to move overseas, it's not a new experience. It's rather just one and the same. It's just continuing a pattern of learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, even in the US, there are things that I think are appropriate and helpful for us to do, even if they're uncomfortable. What's one goal that I had when I was a teenager is that I didn't want what I did and did not do to be based upon my comfort, but rather about my convictions. And so if I knew this was right, it didn't matter if it was comfortable to me or not, I was going to do it. And so that's something that I think served me very well when it came to my interactions with people, skills that I learned, places that I went to, places where I moved to, that I was constantly willing to live one foot outside my comfort zone. And that kind of built up a tolerance in me to be a little bit more flexible when it comes to living in uncomfortable places. And so before I moved here, I lived in the city of Boston, Massachusetts, which was a metropolitan area, very different from the rural, kind of boondocks of central Indiana. And then obviously moving here, very different from Boston, but it wasn't that different because I was just learning to live one step outside my comfort zone, and I've already been doing that for a long time. So that's just another little bit of advice I think will serve you well and make your transition to moving overseas a lot more smooth. If you found this video encouraging or helpful in any way, please let me know by liking or commenting that on this video. Not only does that help the YouTube algorithm to kind of share this video with more people, it also tells me what are the types of videos I should be making more of. And so I can very much imagine this becoming a little bit of a series as I think of more and more things that I wish someone would have told me 5 years before I came to Sierra Leone. And so maybe be on the lookout for that. Thanks so much for watching. You guys are the best. I appreciate all of the support you guys send our way, and I'll catch you in the next video.